Hey everybody, this is Tom Salemi of DeviceTalks. Welcome back to the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast. I've got a bit of a cold, so please excuse my scratchy voice. But very happy to be back in the podcast chair after visiting the Purdue Boilermakers last week. Had a great visit with my son there, and the Boilermakers won. And unfortunately, they lost on Sunday against Chris Newmarker's Ohio State, whatever they are, Buckeyes, whatever they are. But Chris was kind not to bring it up in the intro to today's podcast. But onward, boiler up, hammer down, let's go. Anyway, our podcast today, we've got a couple of great interviews for you. I'll speak later on with InnovHeart CEO David Wilson. He has a great career that started in larger companies. He started as a startup, moved to larger companies, and then back into the startup world. It's a familiar path. But David brought some great insights on those moves, some advice. And I thought toward the end, when I asked him sort of the difference in job responsibilities, I liked his answer to that. So I hope you enjoy that interview. Before that, Chris and I spoke with Brad Estes, who's the CEO of CytexOrtho. CytexOrtho won a pitch contest at AAOS. So we'll talk about CytexOrtho's approach and why it's so important for younger people who are increasingly being sort of steered toward hip replacement, perhaps before they need them or should get them. So we'll talk with Brad about that. So before we begin the podcast episode, I'd like to remind you that Device Talks Boston is happening on May 1st and 2nd. You're still eligible for our early bird rate, so don't wait to save yourself a couple of $100. Go to boston.devicetalks.com to register. We've got a growing agenda up there, growing speaker list up there. I'll be adding more and more, so make sure you don't miss that. It's a great show, and we'd love to meet you all in person. And of course, we have another Device Talks Tuesday coming up this Tuesday with Confluent. If you go to devicetalks.com, you can find out more information about that. All right. Without any further delay, I think I've covered all the things I need to cover. Let's get this podcast started. All right, you ready for this?
Ready.
Chris Newmarker, how are you, sir?
Doing well, Tom. Doing well. My gosh, it is like I'm looking out the window of my home office. It's like 40s and sunny in Minneapolis, and
I always appreciate these weather reports you provide on our podcast that really, can be heard at any time at midnight. Yet people want to know what the weather is in Minneapolis at 4 p.m. on a Thursday, 3 p.m. on a Thursday. Sorry, Central Time.
3 p.m. on a Thursday. It's a good time to take the dog for a walk or something and listen to Device Talks Weekly.
Exactly.
That's what I think that's the best thing to do.
Not right now though. Let's finish this recording.
Yeah,
okay.
We gotta get this done. Yeah.
And you also need to get a dog. You don't have a dog, but
yeah, it's true. I can't walk the cat. The cat's just difficult.
That'll get you a reputation in the neighborhood.
I was channeling you, man. I mean, I know you walk the dog. Do you still? I haven't noticed you doing any videos on LinkedIn lately.
I posted a few videos of my dog, and they were not well received, and I was a little offended because my dog's adorable.
Yeah.
I'm posting a video of my dog walking in the woods. How is this not viral?
You broke a boundary. You broke a LinkedIn boundary.
I think I did. People like Tom's just pandering now. It's pathetic.
This is LinkedIn. We're here for business. No dog.
Other people post their dogs, and I've let it go. Obviously, I'm not that upset about it. But
you sound like you've let it go. I think we're good.
I absolutely have. I'm good. I'm at peace with it. My dog's adorable. I love her. That's all I need to know. But we've got a guest here who's endured this nonsense for far too long. Yes. Brad Estes, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me.
Now, Chris, you invited Brad. You've been covering his story, so why don't you bring our listeners up to date?
Yeah, we invited. I reached out to Brad because last week we were just we didn't have people in person at AAOS 2024 in San Francisco, but we were just covering all the news coming out of it, and Brad's company CytexOrtho won the inaugural ortho pitch technology competition at AAOS 2024. So yeah, congrats, Brad, and thanks for coming on here with us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. That was a really fun event, kind of surprisingly fun event for me, but we walked away with a win. So pretty cool for our entire team.
Do you have a sense of how many other companies, how many you were competing with?
I didn't at the time. They announced it while I was there that they had over 40 entries into the contest, and then they kind of funneled it down, from July when it first opened down until December when they announced the 4 finalists. And we made it through the academy surgeons and their technical committees and all that stuff, and it was just 4 at the end. I got to pitch live at AAOS. That was pretty cool.
That's fantastic. I mean, tell us a little bit more, about the technology. I mean, just reviewing what it was, it looked like some really cool tech.
Yeah, so we're basically targeting those patients who are too early for a hip replacement because they're young, they're active, and they'll wear out their implant multiple times in their lifetime if they want to keep that active lifestyle.
Yeah.
And we have technology that can basically restore the surface of their joint. So we're restoring both the form, which means the anatomy and the congruity of the joint, but we're also restoring it functionally. And we're doing it in a way that's friendly to the biology in the joint. People have done that before with different types of products and different types of materials, but what we're doing is doing it in a way so that we are friendly to the cells, tissue development, and the implant's absorbable. So over time it goes away and the patient's left with their own tissues.
How does that work? I mean, what's the underlying technology? I mean, I think
that sounds easy. Yeah. I mean, I could do it. I'm sure.
I mean, I'm going to get to work on that right now. But I'm thinking it has something to. I noticed on your LinkedIn profile, you've got this really cool background of I think it's electron microscope view of your
materials in the implant. Yeah.
And it looks like yarn and like braided,
It is. So we took a textile based approach, and this came out of Duke University when I was at Duke, a long time ago. I was in the Department of Orthopedic Surgery there, doing my PhD work with another guy. And then the other founder was our professor at the time, and we were working on this 3D woven construct, and we're actually weaving in 3 dimensions. If you can picture that, it's really hard to imagine that. But instead of just traditional X and Y basket type weaving, we're also weaving in that Z or 3rd dimension as well. And
wow.
so what that does conceptually is by controlling the materials and the spacing in all 3 of those directions, you can start to dial in the mechanical properties of the tissues you're trying to replace in your body. And so that's what we did here. So, one of the co-founders, Frank Mutos, had his expertise is in textiles. And that's what he did for his PhD dissertation. I was working on cell-based stuff at the time. And basically our first paper was in Nature, and it showed that we could tune the structure to match the native properties of articular cartilage without any compromise of the ability to form tissue in the joint. And that kind of started us out on our journey with that discovery. And so that's kind of the hallmark feature of the implant. There's some other things to it too, but that was kind of our secret sauce and what got us going.
When you say the implant is absorbed, or what is it? Is it designed to provide a relief for a certain amount of time and then to be replaced again, or is it?
It sounds like
it break down and then become some other new?
Yeah, what I'm hearing, it has
tissue.
the physical properties of cartilage, and then so it's giving you that support that you need, and then it dissolves over time as like the native cartilage grows in.
Yeah. Yes. So from day one when we implant it, we both restore the form of the joint, meaning the anatomy, as I mentioned, but then functionally it works from day one too. So the mechanical properties of the joint are restored from day one. And people have done that before with artificial materials that are meant to be permanent. So that wasn't anything new. What we added to the equation was the ability to absorb over time and keep that functionality. And so as cells come in, attach to the implant, and then start to make tissue, we've shown this tissue to be functional in all our preclinical animal studies. And we've taken animal studies out to a year now, which is what FDA demands for clinical trials. And so we've done that, and we've shown that as the implant absorbs, we don't lose the form or we don't lose the functionality of the joint. So it's pretty cool. So we thought that's what would happen from our benchtop testing and our publications, but we showed that in our preclinical animal models as well.
And what kind of material is it? Is it like a polymer or what?
Yeah, it's actually a well-known polymer. It's not a secret what we're using. It's an absorbable polyester called polycaprolactone. Sutures
Okay.
are made from it. There's some bone plugs that are made from it. It's not, it's not super common in orthopedics, but it's used, and it's got a good track record with FDA. So it's something they recognize and something they're familiar with.
Yeah, so it's not exotic. It's something we're used to using in the body, and it's got a track record. And
Right. And we tried multiple materials. We tried non-absorbable materials. We tried other biologics. We even tried silk, stuff like that. That's pretty cool. But at the end of the day, we picked this one because of its safety profile, its biocompatibility. It absorbs so slowly, it gives the body ample time to make that functional tissue matrix in and around it as it
yeah,
absorbs. And so that was why we chose that material.
my gosh, when you talk about like weaving the material, I mean, what scale is that at? I mean, is this like micron level or
It's pretty good. I mean, on the order of, yeah, I mean, these yarns are, several hundred microns in diameter,
wow?
and, so they're yarns, they're multi-filamented yarns. And we've spec'd those, and we've controlled the sourcing of those things and had to manufacture them. You can't just go and order those from Amazon, of course. So
Right, yeah.
we had to figure out how to make those and, climb those manufacturing hurdles, but we were able to do that.
So where are you in product development and testing?
So we're gearing up for human clinical trials right now, and
Huh.
we're approaching a phase 1 trial, which is a safety trial. It's an IDE study, and we are working on our final documentation right now as we speak to get that started. So FDA will receive a big packet of thousands of pages within the next week to get that going. We have a clinical trial already being negotiated with Washington University in St. Louis. They're going to perform the first trial for us with our clinical advisors. They're just fantastic and experts in hip preservation. They're going to lead that trial. So it'll be 15 patients, and we'll get some human clinical data here pretty soon.
And are you targeting patients who need pain relief but aren't eligible for a hip replacement, or those who would be getting a hip replacement?
It's the former. It's those younger patients.
Mhm.
I mean, there's a lot of young patients in their 20s and 30s that have some kind of disease, and a lot of times we label it pre-arthritic disease, but these patients are headed towards a total hip replacement in probably 7 to 8 years. And our surgeons look at it and go, "I've got nothing for that patient right now, but
Yeah.
they need help." And so one of our surgeons, called it benign neglect. They'll go into the joint, they will relieve whatever is causing the damage, but then they're stuck
Yeah.
with these lesions inside the joint that really don't have any solutions. And we know that they're going towards deterioration, degradation. This joint's going to start falling apart, and they're on that fast track for a total hip replacement. So that's really the patient that we're targeting to begin
They're
with.
just too early in their lives to get hardware in there, and so instead,
Yeah.
yeah, that's tough.
And that's the problem right now. I mean, if you look at the data right now, 50% of the total hip replacements are patients under the age of 65. That's not good.
Yeah.
28% are under the age of 55. That's not good either. And then what we're seeing from insurance data is that, in those younger age categories, 35 to 44-year-olds, those are growing at a 14% growth rate year over year. 45 to 54-year-olds are going at a 25% growth rate. And then 55 to 64-year-olds, that's over a 40% growth rate in those patient populations.
It's
And keep
interesting
in
what's
mind,
causing those trends is just like we're
it's
living
crazy.
longer, or we're not
It's crazy
we're not
because
taking.
those patients,
Cell phones, damn it!
yeah.
No, I don't know.
Yeah, right.
Exactly. I mean, those patients were never intended to get a hip replacement, and yet that's what's driving this large market right now. And orthopedic surgeons can't even keep up with the demand of it, and that's a problem. And so this is a patient population that definitely needs a solution. So we're starting out with that pre-arthritic patient that's heading towards a total joint replacement because there's nothing for that patient. But then what we want to do is start to incorporate some of those earlier osteoarthritis patients, kind of early to intermediate osteoarthritis, and see if we can reverse the disease and get these patients back on their feet, rather than just having them wait through chronic pain and disability for 7 or 8 years while they're waiting for a total hip replacement. That kind of sucks for a patient.
Totally.
Yeah. Do you think historically these are people who have just endured and not sought any sort of relief? Is it just that folks are becoming more aware of options and they're going to the doctor sooner, and that's why we're seeing these numbers of cases surge? Or to Chris's point, is there actually something going on that we think is degrading our body faster than it used to?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer for it. I don't know if anybody really knows the answer of why. I mean, it could be lifestyle, it could be environment, it could be obesity. There's a lot of factors that play in there. And but we know that's what's driving. I think other thing we're seeing right now too is there are better materials for joint replacements. I mean, if you look at the major strategics out there, I mean they have products that they tout for more longevity. They have better better bearings for their surfaces, and so they're saying that we can use these from younger patients. And I've talked to the patients. I talked to a 38-year-old recently who had a total hip replacement. And he said, Brad, it sucks. He said, I kind of bought into it that why not just do it now? Why not just go ahead and do it and get back to your active lifestyle? But he said it was the exact opposite of what I was promised, because instead of going and doing all the running and the exercise and the rock climbing and all that I was doing, now I'm on a bike, I'm swimming, I can't go whitewater rafting, I can't, do these trails in the mountains. And he goes, I bought into it, but it's not true. It's like, if I want that implant to last 15, 20 years, and think about him. I mean, at 20 years, he's going to be 58. That's still pretty young. And so, he's going to have to get, another procedure. And that second procedure is not nearly as efficient and the results aren't nearly as good. But these patients are starting to buy into it a little bit. And I think that's driving it a little bit too. In the past, it's just been, they go, you see the orthopedic surgeon, they take an X-ray, and it looks like you have some osteoarthritis in the joint. Here's some ibuprofen, take some NSAIDs, do some PT, and when you can't stand it anymore, come back and we'll get you on the list for a total joint replacement. And that's a terrible proposition, but they don't even do that many studies on these patients right now. So, and some of those studies, some of the data that we have say that on average, that time frame from that first visit to the orthopedic surgeon to that total hip replacement is 7 years.
Wow.
I mean, think about that for a second. 7 years with
suffering,
pain, suffering, you're more and more disabled, and then you just can't stand it anymore and you just go ahead and do it. But there's marketing pushes right now to do it younger and do it earlier, and that's some of what we're seeing here in the market.
And when did CytexOrtho start?
I like to say we're an old startup company. So
medtech has that. I mean, that's
we do. I mean, we spun the technology out of Duke University around 2010, and started with nothing outside the university. I had 1 foot at Duke University and 1 foot at CytexOrtho for several years before we left. For me and the other co-founder, Frank Mutos, left Duke permanently in around 2016. So I like to say the first 4 or 5 years we figured out all the wrong way to do cartilage repair, and it wasn't until we in 2016 we had a grant and to do a study with in a large animal model, and it was in the hip, and we just, to make a long story short, we just hit it out of the park, and that kind of set us on our journey of saying this is what was possible with our implant.
Oh, that's great. I mean, it is interesting. I mean, like when we look around and say what kind of startup should we cover in this industry, I think medtech is one of the few industries where it's like a 10-year-old company, even a 12, 14-year-old company, you're like it's a startup, because it just takes so long sometimes to figure things out and, get through all the validation and regulatory processes. But tell us a little bit more. I mean, my gosh, this is a journey. I mean, and
it has been. I mean, it's crazy. Somebody told me about that time. There was somebody in the local community here who had his own company and done a lot of work in biotech, and he said, "Are you sure you want to do this?" And I'm like, "Yeah, why not?" And he says, "I don't think it's possible to take an IDE PMA product to market from A to Z. You can never fund it. You'll never be successful." And I was like,
wow.
"Geez, thanks for the encouragement."
That was encouraging. Yeah.
Thanks, pal.
Did he at least buy you a beer when he said that?
I don't think so. And I'm like, I was like, you're crazy. And I didn't believe him for a second. I kind of took it as a personal challenge at that point. I was like,
Yeah, you're
okay, we'll see if we can do it. And I over the years, as we've kind of, doubled down on our commitment to provide solutions for patients, I totally get where he was coming from. I mean, this journey is full of, swamps and landmines and, people shooting at you. And it's just, it's extremely hard. And we basically gotten this far almost totally on NIH grant funding.
Wow.
And so we've raised over $19 million on NIH grant funding to do this work. And I think that speaks tremendously to the technology, and it's been vetted and validated through NIH, just thoroughly. And so that really, really puts underscores the science associated with our implant. But it's also the absolutely slowest way to do product development. And so,
wow.
Before I was at Duke, I was at Medtronic. I was actually in the spine industry for a while. Having gone through, spine in its heyday in the 90s. And so it's with those budgets, you can go a lot faster. With grant budgets, you have to go really slowly and be really methodical, and your every decision's more weightier because of the way it's funded.
Was there anything particularly specific about your approach or your technology or your targeted audience that made it easier for you to secure NIH grant funding, or is this something that other startups could do if they're willing to put in the time and the pace that goes along with it? Is there a defense contract thing going on or something like military, anything that's sort of applied?
I mean, we went the SBIR, STTR route through NIH. We tried some DoD funding at times, and we weren't successful getting that type of funding. I think you have to have great technology. That's part of the equation, and then you have to be able to write a great grant. And during my PhD work, I trained with probably one of the best. A guy by the name of Farsh Gilak. He's a professor at Washington University right now, and I learned everything from him. And he's incredible at writing grants, incredible at communicating, and so then the third thing is you have to have just incredible perseverance. And so you have to know that you have technology and your science is solid. But then you just have to keep hammering on it with NIH submissions, and if the grant's good and this technology is good, you'll get it funded. And so it's an exercise in just I'm going to be super diligent and super perseverant, and we're going to get this funded, and I'm going to wait you out. So
wow.
So we were just dogmatic in that approach.
Is the flip side then that hopefully because it was just so thorough and there was just so much examination of the science through this whole process, that now that you're heading into this regulatory process, that things, does that help make things like feel really, really, really tight, like really, really well put together?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think that same determined spirit that we had, and I have an incredible team too. I mean, there are 4 full-time PhD scientists, engineers who work on my team, and they're just all incredibly talented, incredibly gifted. And we've taken that same approach towards manufacturing. We've taken the same approach towards regulatory, and so at the end of the day, the documentation that we're providing to FDA, we've checked all the boxes. So I don't see any reason why we can't start this clinical trial, pretty soon here. FDA is always great at throwing curveballs. I mean, you guys know that, you think you got it all squared away and you got it all lined up, and all of a sudden here comes that big curveball you can't hit. So, I hope that our preparation and the work that we put in, gets us over that hump quickly, but we'll see. I'll know in a couple of weeks here.
Just one more thing that I think would be a really good parting question would just be like, okay, just after hearing you tell the story of this whole process that's gotten you here, I mean, what advice would you give to someone coming to you, with an idea who's, wants to get, started in this. I mean, would you be like that guy years ago, or like, don't,
Yeah, don't do it. Don't do it, run. No, not at all. I mean, I think it's got to be your passion. I mean,
yeah,
if you're not totally sold on what you're doing and that we're driven to help that patient. We still get comments and emails from patients all the time. I'm 37. I'm putting off a hip replacement as long as possible. I will be first in line to try it if this is allowed. I mean, those are the kind
wow,
of emails that we get right now. And
yeah,
so you've got to be willing to, all right, it's going to be hard. Nobody's going to give you anything. And you just have to be willing to just persevere through just solving tons of problems. And if you have a dream and you have the solution for something and you want to make it happen, go for it. That's what I would tell them.
it's awesome.
That
Yeah,
sounds like
sounds
better
better.
advice. All right. Brad Estes, thanks for joining us on the
Thanks,
podcast.
guys. Good talking to you.
All right, now I'd like to play my interview with David Wilson. He's the CEO of InnovHeart. David has an interesting start into the medtech industry. He wasn't a biomedical engineer to start, but he became one after a moment of clarity, and we'll get into that story and his career that had led him to become global president of a few large businesses and, of course, the CEO of a smaller startup. We'll talk about that path and the difference between the two. Once again, don't forget to join us at DeviceTalks Boston. It's happening on May 1st and 2nd at the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center. Go to boston.devicetalks.com to register and do it before our early bird rate expires in just a couple of weeks. Well, David Wilson, welcome to the podcast.
Good to be with you, Tom. Thanks for having me.
You've got a great career I want to cover. I love folks who start off as engineers and find their way into the executive suite. I want to find out about that journey. And then, of course, find out about your company that you're leading now, which is in a really critical space. So let's get to the big question first. How'd you find your way into the medical device industry?
So I went to Auburn University and studied mechanical engineering. And my first job out of the university was with Chicago Bridge and Iron Company. And one day when I was using a blowtorch to melt ice off of a piece of steel, I thought, well, I'm enjoying this, but maybe I have another purpose. And I was aware of the emerging field of biomedical engineering. It was not what it is today. And there was a program at UAB in Alabama, and I literally went to a truck stop, got through to the dean of engineering, and was able to broker a research stipend. And I decided to pack up my Honda Accord and head from Damascus, Maryland, south. And was glad I did, because biomedical engineering really is a union of medicine and engineering to help people. And I've been at it for 30 years, and I feel very blessed. It was a good decision. Bridges and roads are really important, but
Absolutely.
It was a good change for me.
I need to unpack that. Why did this momentous conversation happen at a rest stop? Were you just driving home from this experience at work and saying enough is enough?
No, I actually was doing very well at CBI, and being a conscientious person, I said, I better tell these folks that my passion is somewhere else. And so this was before cell phones. I'll show my age here. And the payphone was available at a rest stop, and I had a lunch break, and I made a phone call. And
Okay.
It's good to be proactive.
Yeah, no, I forget. I lived during that era as well, and yeah, I had a phone booth at a nearby coffee shop. That was my where I had many important conversations with a future employer. So I remember those experiences. So talk a bit about your work. What were you able to negotiate with them, and did it just lead to your studying in the biomedical area? And again, how did you sort of settle on that? Did you just kind of spin a wheel, or did you have some personal connection with medical research?
No, it was the program at UAB, University of Alabama at Birmingham, is connected with a huge global medical center there. It was really ahead of its time, and they just had a great faculty. And I connected with the dean of engineering and told him why I was interested. I had contemplated, like a lot of engineers, maybe going to medical school. And they were looking for research students to work with the Department of Surgery. And I had an opportunity to focus on growth factors, cytokines, if you will, for wound healing. And I wasn't really sure where that would lead at the time, but I knew it was moving more toward my passion, which was applying, my life really to helping doctors develop better tools. And so sometimes things just work out, and it lined up and the time was right.
That's great. And what was your first job in the medical device industry?
So I joined a startup company called Otogen, which later became Cohesion in the Bay Area. David Sierra, who graduated ahead of me, was the CEO there, working with an otologist, Rodney Perkins, who was a real innovator, worked on cochlear implants and a lot of other, hearing aid devices, et cetera. And the concept was that we were going to take collagen. We had a partnership with Collagen Corporation at the time, collagen, fibrin, and thrombin, and come up with implants to help with otologic needs like tympanic membranes, nerve conduit, et cetera. And my research was in that area. So I was the second employee, lab coat. If you were going to do it, you had to invent it and make it. So it was really sort of an extension of the university, and it was fun. Ultimately, I didn't stay there very long. We did get a product that made it to commercial use in Europe, but I was on to my next stop after that.
And it looked like your first job at a larger company. Was that with Cordis?
Yes, I joined Cordis. Another classmate of mine was there in the advanced R&D group, and he said, "Hey, have you thought about Cordis?" And I looked into it. Didn't know at the time that Cordis was about to be acquired by Johnson & Johnson. So I joined just before the acquisition, which was ultimately kind of a hostile takeover, which proved to be a good opportunity for me. I had no skin in the game on the old Cordis. I had an appreciation. Cordis was amazing. It was vertically integrated. We compounded resin, extruded tubing, made our own stents. I mean, it was all in one place. J&J acquired Cordis for the balloon technology to deliver the stent, which they had all the original patents on. And so my career took off from there. We became part of J&J, and I spent 2 decades there. Very, very proud of my time at Johnson & Johnson.
Were you still at engineering at that point? Had you moved on to sales? And let's talk a bit about your transition from engineering to where you are today.
So I joined Cordis as an engineer too, and was in the advanced R&D group. And when the acquisition happened, all of the focus turned to the coronary space. Cordis had 4 companies: electrophysiology, neurology, or neurovascular, peripheral vascular, and coronary. And about a year into it, a new leader, Bob Cordini, came in to start the endovascular program. We acquired a company called Nitinol Devices and Components. And I was selected as the project leader to come up with the first laser cut nickel titanium stent. And we had a lot of success with that. We got the product to market very quickly, built out the portfolio for a variety of anatomical indications. I was promoted to director. I had a leader who said, either David can run the department or go to a different department, but he and I don't need to have the same job. So he graciously moved on, and I took over the group, which doesn't happen all the time. And we expanded from there. I gained in responsibility. I had a group in New Jersey, a group in Florida, and a group in the Netherlands. Had another great leader, Martin Madden, who came in as the VP. And when he was pulled away to go into orthopedics, he named me his backfill. And as part of that, I had an opportunity to go to Columbia University for my MBA. And I was told, and this answers an earlier question, that the view at Johnson & Johnson at the time is they wanted more diversity of background in the senior level positions, understanding technology, really understanding R&D, not just sales and marketing was important. And so I was VP of R&D while I went to school. And when I finished that program, I was moved into a sales assignment. I ran the West Coast of our endovascular division, and then moved back in-house for more of a marketing general management role, and eventually left and went to Ethicon in a new role. But it was really forward thinking, I think, on the part of leadership at J&J to try to pull capable people along into the senior ranks, because historically, especially in the pharmaceutical group, it was really more of a sales and marketing kind of background to get to the senior levels, but they wanted to get more technology people. And I was all too happy to do it. It was a great move, a great opportunity. But, really they said to me, if you go into sales and you don't like it, you can come back in. But I had more fun in sales than I think that I've ever had. So, different kind of accountability, but it was a lot of fun and a great opportunity for me.
What is that transition like? Not everyone's the same, obviously, and people have different strengths and different desires to do what they do for work. But I think many engineers would find the idea of leaving engineering to be difficult, and to move into sales perhaps even more difficult. The transition worked well for you. What were some tips? Are there tips? Is there advice that you give to folks who are in that position today that you found yourself in 20 or so years ago? And what does that advice sound like?
My general advice, and I've heard others say this, so maybe I'm borrowing it, but always say yes. If you're you trust your leadership and you trust that you've chosen well for where you're applying your talent, when opportunities come, say yes. And when I was presented the opportunity to move on the GM path, I said yes. They gave me a little bit of a safety net, but I knew I'd be accountable. And then I had the courage to do it because what I've learned in my career is that it's really all about people. We always say that the people in the company are the greatest asset. And if you can connect individually with people, if you can establish the right performance expectations for teams, great things can happen. And when I went into sales, I knew the technology and doctors loved talking to me, but I was able to really understand what was going on with the salespeople, good hires that they had made, bad hires that they had made. And I was able to lean into that and just improve the overall talent we had in the group. And we actually became sales division leader of the year during my tenure there. And it was really just focusing on people and also being authentic. I said, look, guys, I'm going to learn sales from you, but I know the products really well and I'm here to support you. So I think you can get outside of your comfort zone if you stay to the basics and really just sort of be where you are at the time and enjoy it.
And did you see becoming a worldwide president, as you were a few times, as according to your LinkedIn, was that a goal for you? Did you see that this was a path you wanted to take, or did you just keep saying yes and you ultimately found yourself in a leadership position?
I knew that I liked to have decision-making authority and control over all aspects of a project. And when you're an R&D leader, you're accountable for everything, but you don't own everything. And so you spend a lot of time cajoling manufacturing to prioritize your project and finance to fund it and, regulatory and quality to take appropriate risks to move forward. And for me, spending time with all those functions and the opportunity to influence them in a good way naturally leads you to want to be a worldwide president. Now, the piece that's different is you also have a lot of accountability for sales results. And so I think having experience in sales, understanding generally how marketing folks think is important as well, because you have the total business. But the ability, I'm very goal oriented. So the ability to focus on, top objectives in innovation, top objectives in the current year, understanding that companies have to have a track record of performance year after year. It's all about timing and planning and strategic planning was just very attractive to me. And, so I welcomed it and was honored when I had my first opportunity to achieve that level in J&J.
And you will last look at your background, your time as worldwide president in Cordis from 2015 to 2017, where you assisted in the turnaround of the company when it was acquired by Cardinal Health from J&J. How unique an experience was that? Please kind of set the scene. What situation were you coming into? And I'd love to just understand some of the steps you took and your team took to turn things around.
Sure. Well, my first worldwide president role was in plastic surgery at Mentor, and I was there for 5 years, loved it. I took the company from a singular focus on aesthetic medicine into reconstructive surgery. We did a lot of innovation on 510K products for post-mastectomy reconstruction, and that was really just bringing in some R&D talent and training the sales force to find their way to the big hospital, not just the aesthetic medicine private practice offices. Our group leader, Salemi contacted me about Cordis again, where I had started as an engineer too, and said, look, confidentially, I had to sign some paperwork. We're going to be divesting the company to Cardinal Health, and they're looking for a leader to come with and would like you to weigh in on whether you're interested in that. And I had an opportunity to go to Cardinal and meet George Barrett, the CEO, and Don Casey, who was CEO of the medtech segment. And I thought, ironically, Cordis was my entree into J&J, and it may be my exit out of. And I thought, my plan at J&J was I'll give it 5 years, and I was there, 4x that. And I thought, well, maybe now's the time. And so it was bittersweet. I could have stayed at J&J, but I decided to go. I found out ultimately it wasn't a great fit, unfortunately, for Cardinal Health, which is a great company. Their stock is, I just looked, over $100. They've stuck to their knitting and they do really well, but their risk profile in the cardiovascular space was a bit out of sync with where they normally had been. And so they divested, and it's with private equity now. But for me, for personal growth, we had to stand up an international business because Cardinal really was not a global company. So offices and, all of the order to cash systems, et cetera. So I really had an opportunity to participate and lead, really building out a global company within Cardinal Health, doing a lot of explanation of what the heck Cardinal bought, really influencing our folks in Japan who had never heard of Cardinal Health, and those in China who had to stay on board. So it was a different type of role for me. I think the other thing is Cardinal at the time really didn't invest a very large percentage of sales towards organic R&D. So the mission was really M&A, L&A, a lot of licensing deals. And so I really focused on importing products that were developed externally. We brought in a balloon portfolio from India, brought back in drug-eluting stents from Israel. And so, that was a lot of my time at Cordis was, even though we did a lot of acquisitions, it was really about line extensions and, trying to build on big acquisitions. This was really in licensing technologies, which was good for me. It was different. And, I had done some of that at J&J when I was at Ethicon, but after a while, I had a call, about another opportunity, and I decided to move again, but no regrets at Cardinal. Good learning experience, taught me a lot about, really thinking about fit and analyzing, whether or not, some marriages are not the best marriages, and that wasn't the best one for Cardinal.
We'll get into InnovHeart right now, but then you moved on to President of Global Plasma at Haemonetics. Anything to add about that? And give us just a minute on that, and then I'd love to understand how this opportunity came to be and why you decided to return to a startup.
Sure. Haemonetics came along, really, you in your career, you build out a network of people that you admire who typically are helping to lead you in the right direction. I was connected with Chris Simon at Haemonetics. He had left McKinsey and gone to Haemonetics as a CEO, and the person that connected me was, a trusted advocate. And I really, connected with Chris about a great opportunity to grow the stock at Haemonetics and really get on an innovation pathway. The challenges and opportunities there were, it's really a large piece of capital equipment. You make the money off of disposables, and you're really working with a procurement organization and negotiating on pennies, very high millions of units for global plasma collection, and just really understanding the full supply chain from the fractionators, the collectors, everybody's individual business model was great. Along the way, after several years there, I had a phone call about InnovHeart, my current opportunity, and I guess we're going to talk about that next.
That's great. So you had the phone call. Is the first thing you think of when a startup calls, is your first answer going to be yes? Is it something you need to be kind of talked into? Just walk me through that process of what led you to take this job.
Well, I have a good balance of confidence and humility. And when I got the call, I said, I've done a lot of cardiovascular. I've never done structural heart. I can learn a new space, but are you sure you have the right person? And the recruiter said, absolutely. Let me tell you a little bit about the company. And the story was incredibly compelling about the founder, about the board, about the technology. I quickly flew over to Milan and had dinner with a majority of the board members, really was impressed with them. And, frankly, I wanted to be a CEO. And the idea of going back to where I started with startups was not frightening, but I knew what I was getting into. And, I've been reminded at how nimble and creative one can be, especially in a post-COVID supply chain constrained environment. And, we have to fight like heck every day. But if you choose the right team and you have the right technology, it usually can be a winner. We still have a lot to do, but I was convinced that the timing was right for me, and I said yes, and here I am.
All right. So give us a little bit about InnovHeart's origins, its story. It's good. You mentioned the offices in Italy. You also have. Do you have a Boston location, or are you the Boston location, or do you have offices here?
We have an office in Newton, in Boston. We do the implant valve development. in Italy, outside of Milan, in a little country town called Colleretto. And we do the delivery system development here in the U.S. in Boston. And so a bit about the company. The founder is Giovanni, we call him Giovanni Ricchini, who spent a lot of his career in Europe and Switzerland focused on surgical valve implantation. He became very interested in transcatheter mitral valve products. The company he was with at the time wasn't interested in that. He was able to exit and really, he talks about, like a lot of founders, building the first prototypes in his kitchen. And in 2010, he filed for his first patent. And he found a great investment group, Genextra, in Italy, who believed in him. And in 2015, we started our SRL in Italy. Now, I joined in 2022, so they were at it for a while before me. He was able to make it to a clinical study with transapical delivery, so really driven more by cardiovascular surgery, cardiothoracic surgeons, beginning in 2020, enrolled 5 patients, right into COVID by 2022. And I joined, and my focus has really been the next mode of delivery, which is transeptal delivery. And we will be beginning our clinical studies later here in the first quarter in the month of March. That's our target.
Explain to me and to some of our listeners who may not know, what is the difference in the delivery approach? How is it done differently?
So transapical is a short, relatively rigid delivery catheter. You puncture through the patient's side into the lower lobe on the left ventricle of the heart, and you go directly against blood flow across the mitral plane, and you deploy the implant. So it does require, suturing and repairing the heart, the puncture that you make. It's a bit more invasive. Certainly there are more concerns about infection, et cetera. And it has to be done by a cardiothoracic surgeon. Transeptal delivery, you go in on the right side of the heart through the iliac vein, and you go up into the right atrium. You puncture across the septum, thus the term transeptal, into the left atrium. Then you turn and you go down across the mitral plane in an antegrade fashion, and you deliver the implant. So the engineering required to go from the groin all the way, into the heart, across the septum is pretty challenging. Mm-hmm. And, I know when the aortic valves were worked on, first product there came to market in 2011. In early days, there was a lot of concern about placement accuracy, et cetera. That's all been solved now. But the real focus is on a relatively easy to use delivery system, a reasonable procedure time, and then a really durable implant that, will perform. And so currently there are no products approved for transcatheter mitral valve replacement. There are clips available for something called TEER, transcatheter edge-to-edge repair. There is a transapical mitral valve product on the market in Europe, but it's really the next frontier. And mitral is a very challenging space. In fact, we've been leapfrogged now by Edwards, who just got PMA approval for a tricuspid valve. So It's been a bit over a decade since there was a valve approval. Tricuspid was next. And I think based on where a lot of companies are right now, there'll be a product approved. A lot of companies in PMA studies right now in the not so distant future. And it's just a huge opportunity for a lot of patients in need.
So what does that approval by Edwards mean to companies like yours moving in this space as well? Does it create opportunity or create challenges or both?
I think it creates opportunity. It's a very challenging financial environment right now, I think, across all sectors, as you know, and startups are always raising money. So I think it's a confidence builder that there are new anatomies, new frontiers beyond aortic valves. So it's nice to see another product being approved. It's nice to see that FDA granted early approval for them. They looked probably at the curves, and the data were so compelling, they gave early approval, which I think was a bit of a surprise. I'm not an expert on that. It's just what I've read. And so I think that's great to see that there's an attitude to help technology come to market that's going to positively, help patients. And so mitral's been a challenge for a lot of companies. I think there have been a lot of key learnings. Clinical study enrollment's been kind of slow based on inclusion criteria. We're uniquely positioned at our company. I think we've been able to learn from others, and we have what we believe is a device that will be more have more utility. We can deal with a lot of the challenges that other companies have faced. We'll see. As I said, we're going to begin in March. I feel very bullish, confident about it. So I think it's great to see products being approved. I also like to see that Azim Latib from Albert Einstein School of Medicine said he thought the ASP could be around $40,000. So that's good to see for margins. We'll see how it plays out. It's early days for them, but certainly, TAVR is becoming more mainstream. Physicians need better tools, and clips are great, but they do have some limitations. So I think a replacement product that can be delivered in a very minimally invasive approach for mitral valve replacement is needed, and it's good to be in the hunt to be one of the first companies to do that.
Talk a bit about your financing. I'm seeing now it looks like you raised, InnovHeart raised $55 million of Series C in 2022 to be about 2 months before you joined. Did you have a hand in that at all, or was that sewed up before you joined? Or
it was sewed up just before I joined. I certainly, part of the lead investor in that is a company called Grand Pharmaceuticals based in China. And so part of that 55 had to do with a licensing fee. We licensed our technology to them for Greater China. So mainland China, Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Macau, which, has been done by other companies as well. They've proven to be a really good partner. We have milestones that are earnable, and certainly they took an equity position in InnovHeart. And so I think, one of the things we've learned about China is that to get on the fast track, sometimes called the green path, it's good to be local. So I think, we spend a lot of time with them, technology transfer, training them on the procedure, et cetera. So it's a real partnership. So I inherited that and, lead that in a joint steering committee, et cetera. Our principal investors are largely the same, mostly Italian institutions. We are in the process of doing another raise. Now I call it a Series C extension due to some of the, I think every company has faced a slow supply chain. So things have taken longer. And so we're looking for a bit more fuel to do up to 30 patients in our early feasibility work and prepare the path for filing for our global pivotal study. So certainly I look forward to having great clinical data to share as we talk to investors. Over the history of the company, we've been really successful in Series A, Series B, and as I said, Series C, a little less than 60 million in equity invested, rather evenly distributed across, all of those rounds. So I feel great about it. We have a lean, mean team with a great technology and a really bright future in a compelling space. So a lot of fun.
how do those licensing deals? I mean, it sounds almost similar to a pharma arrangement. I know some other medtechs have done it as well. I think Recor had a similar deal, if I'm understanding the framework correctly. But how does that factor into your fundraising today? Is it seen as a validation by potential investors? Is it seen as a limitation because that market is potentially owned by someone else? What's the feedback you're getting?
I think the big question from investors usually is, where do you hold the IP and what rights do other companies have that you've done licensing agreements with? And I'm quick to point out in our situation that, Grand Pharma didn't choose to take a board seat. They're an observer. Their rights are restricted to those 4 geographies around Greater China that I mentioned. We have basically a royalty, which is a net sales value based on their future sales, earnable milestones, et cetera. So, certainly if a strategic were to come and look at us and they have a really solid sales force in Greater China, that might give them a little bit of pause, but it's pretty commonplace, at least for the startups here. Other companies have done the same. And, there's always a way to make it mutually beneficial. So, it was the right move for us. And I think most of the questions are really more about, where are you manufacturing the product? There are a lot of, obviously political issues between the U.S. and China at times. And so you have to remain, pretty knowledgeable about how all that works out. But I think in general, it's not an impediment. It's been a positive for us.
And the fact that you have locations in Italy and the U.S., you seem to be running a small but global operation. How does this, how do all these different elements sort of factor into your day-to-day?
Well, I always talk about it as a strength. I think that, we have a U.S. team that understands the U.S. market, understands FDA. We have a European team that understands, Europe, Middle East, and Africa very well, and certainly understands the CE mark process. And now we have this great, partner in China that understands that region certainly better than we ever could in terms of what's happening. As an example, in most of the world, the real interest in the market is the transeptal delivery. But in China, they're equally interested in transapical. So there's some, regional nuances that are important to have from an insight perspective. And, for a small company, it just gives us a lot of reach and expertise to be globally focused. And we have a lot of time zones to deal with. We have a lot of different languages to deal with. I think one of the benefits of COVID is that everyone's gotten really comfortable being on camera. And so, work is something you do, not a place that you go to. And the ability to be on video and see faces and see expressions and have everybody be comfortable with that has been really helpful in this kind of a unique company structure.
Sure, you would have racked up some frequent flyer miles, even more.
Still am, but it would be even more with airplane tickets that are a big multiple of what they were.
Yeah, no kidding. So, final question: you've got some busy times coming up ahead, but what do you see the next couple of years looking like for InnovHeart? How would you like to see things unfold?
Yeah, our goal for this year is to enroll at least 15 patients in our early feasibility study. That's a monthly enrollment rate of about 0.4 patients per month per site. And that'll get us where we need to go. That's about 2x the rate that other companies have been able to do. But I think we'll have fewer screen outs just based on the adaptability and utility of our unique technology. So this year is really about showing that the product can be delivered transeptally. And we've done, over 70 large animals, cadavers, et cetera. We're ready. So that's the focus. And we're also in parallel focusing on getting our IDE submission in to FDA. We'll do that late first quarter, early second quarter, really preparing for the next leg, which would be another 15 patient enrollment on into 2025, mostly in the U.S. So we'd have 30 patients total. And then the third sort of work stream is focusing on manufacturing scale up. So we can produce hundreds of devices, which will really be required for the global pivotal study. And we'd like to file for the IDE for the pivotal study in the second half of 2025. So, focus. Let's get some really good clinical data, really take care of a lot of patients, demonstrate what Saturn can do. Let's do that globally. So start in Europe and then come to the US. Let's, really ramp up in a scalable way our supply chain, then repeat whatever testing is required to file for the IDE for the global pivotal, and then be in a position to do that. And around that time, we'd be looking probably at another Series D raise. And, because that's obviously a huge investment. So busy, but having a good time, and I think focused in the right space for me with the right company, working with a lot of talented people.
That's great. Yeah, no, I'm just curious that your companies you ran previously, you were in charge of thousands. You had quarterly or monthly things you had to account for. You had numbers to look at. You had metrics to measure. Startups, I'm sure you have the same, but it's probably a lot more fluid. How different is this experience running a company? It's got to be different, but what is your day-to-day feel? It just must be a completely different universe than pulling up to a big building with lots of people in it who can give you data and you can measure sales just like that and such.
It is. I spend a lot of time focused on cash flow. Yeah, that's different. When you're in a large company, you're negotiating all the time that, your operating company is more important than every other operating company, and you need your lion's share of the operating budget. And here it's, you have what you have. And so trying to be wise about how you spend it. There's a lot of focus on that, and we have a lot of financial discipline. Certainly it's a different board makeup. When I was in Humanetics, I was in front of the board all the time, but it was a publicly traded company with a board that were not individual investors in the company per se. Here, my board basically is a group of investors. It's their money. And so understanding how they're feeling and making sure they have the information they need and the information they need to convey to their investors, it's very real, very, very tangible, which is kind of exciting. And I find that I have a lot more time, frankly. I don't have all the corporate meetings that fill up the calendar. You can kind of, I never did, but you can kind of sleepwalk your way through. You show up and you're completely booked out and you do your work at, after hours. And here, not as many meetings. And certainly that's mostly a positive. But I also find that a lot of those meetings in big companies do deliver a lot of great training. And so I have to be very cognizant at my startup that not everybody who works with me worked at J&J or Boston Scientific and had, great training on Credo values or manager in the law or how to deal with FCPA or whatever. And so You don't have a big HR department doing those kind of things. So something, it's, I learned from Gary Pruden, you juggle some balls. Some of them are rubber balls. Some of them are glass balls. You don't want to drop the glass ones. So it's important to identify those beyond things that you normally even think about, because if you don't lead it as the CEO, it typically doesn't happen. So I enjoy that challenge.
That's great. I know I've taken a lot of your time and I appreciate it, but I love someone who is very introspective and kind of give me a look on the inside. So I appreciate your taking the time and for joining us on the podcast.
Thanks, Tom. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Well, that is a wrap. Thanks so much for joining us on this episode of the DeviceTalks Weekly Podcast. Please subscribe to the DeviceTalks Podcast Network so you don't miss any of our future episodes of our many, many, many podcast series. We're up to 9, going to introduce 10 and 11 this year for sure, perhaps a few more. So make sure you, again, subscribe to DeviceTalks Podcast Network on any major podcast player. You can also find all the podcasts at DeviceTalks.com. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. DeviceTalks is on YouTube. We're putting some videos up there. Kayleen Brown, our managing editor, has a couple of great podcasts that she's putting the entire interviews up there. So it's a great way to see AI Meets Life Sci and some of our other podcasts. Please do follow me on LinkedIn, Tom Salemi. Also follow Kayleen and Chris as in a Newmarker. And of course, all of our editorial staff. And please connect and follow Device Talks and Mass Device as well. Once again, Device Talks Boston is happening on May 1st and 2nd. Go to boston.devicetalks.com to check out the agenda, the speaker list, and I hope you'll register. We've got a bit of a cool networking opportunity coming up that we'll be announcing soon, and I'm sure we'll make that available to folks who have already registered first. So, or I should say, the earlier you register, the better. So just don't wait. If you're going to join us, just register now. Be great to see you there at the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center again on May 1st and 2nd. All right. Well, once again, that's the end of this podcast episode. Thanks for tuning in. My voice lasts throughout, and I hope you have a great weekend and or day whenever you're listening to this. Take care, everybody.